I would like to take you to, I'd like you to remember this description about the Shudras. Last were the Shudras who had to serve the other three groups and could not perform any ritual. Often women were so grouped with this Shudras. Now, this is the straight-jacketed reductionist view about this Chaturvarna is completely wrong. And you have n number of scholarship, at least today, and in the age of information, that contrarian viewpoints have been raised and have been established, which are textbook, this is not written in some distant past. It is as back as just 15 years back. If you see the line that I have underlined, Rigveda is in old or Vedic Sanskrit, which is different from the Sanskrit you learn in school these days. Again, this is a very cleverly worded statement, and this indicates that whatever you had in the past, whether it is good or bad, it's a very alienated system because that language was completely different. You see, now you may use the word Sanskrit, but you see that Sanskrit is very, very different from the Sanskrit that your Rigveda, which you venerate so much, is written in. Now, very interestingly, the very next page of that of the same chapter, they put a title of the paragraph saying how historians study the Rigveda. Now, these historians are again from this era, given back maybe before 30 years or before 40 years from when this book was published. Now, if the Sanskrit that we study in the school is very different, and the Rigvedic Sanskrit was very different, there arises the question, how did these historians access the Sanskrit of the Rigveda? Like Hinduism, Islam was interpreted in a way in a variety of ways by its followers. Now, this is a very clever way of introducing Islam as well as creating a false equivalence. When they want to introduce Hinduism, they have all negative things to be talked about right from class 6. But when they want to introduce Islam, see, look at the choice of words and choice of the phrasing and the kind of emotion that it conveys. And you see the other disclaimer that they give, variety ways of interpreters, varieties of way of interpreting it. But mind you, they do not inform us that yes, Islam also had varieties of interpretation, but each interpreter fought against each other and there was bloodshed. Thank you very much for that kind introduction, and I particularly thank the organizers, especially the Indus University, to have arranged this special talk. And I have mixed feelings, for I have before me sitting as well as the talk given by the giant from whose fountainhead of knowledge I have been drinking. So it's with this trepidation as well as my humble submission that I am not a trained historian, but as an observer from the outside world, outside of the history world, that because I'm a student of science, I've been trained in the way the physical science actually works, and that is also my work that through which I earn my bread and butter. But it's my child who goes to school and studies the history, through which I get to see what is being taught and what we were taught at least 30 years back, and my few observations as a layman from history point of view, from a scientific perspective, taking a case study of class 6 and 7 NCERT history textbooks, particularly highlighting the points that are, at least in my limited personal understanding, completely contrarian, and it makes me ask a question whether it is really the history of our country that is being taught to the impressionable minds, or is it a propaganda of a particular ideology. Before I kind of get into subject proper, I like to lay the little bit background, what went behind the text, what goes behind normally the textbook writing, at least in the last 70 years. Without going into a lot of history, right now we are experiencing the National Education Policy 2020. The draft was in 1919, 2020 it was brought out, and we are going through the NCF phase now, that is curriculum framework is being talked about. And this whole process is to now kind of bring a reform or change the existing educational framework right from starting early ages of the child when he or she enters the school till the very last degree that the child can get from this country's educational organization. This is an activity that is taken place after the previous one, which was in between 2005 to 2007. And like this, every subject were undergoing updation reforms. And particularly in the case of history, the committee was headed by one Professor Niladri Bhattacharya from Jawaharlal Nehru University. And he was heading the committee particularly interested to draft the history textbooks of the school. Now, he was, as I said, he was the chief advisor for this book, and he was guiding the work of this committee, which was interested to write the textbooks. Now, what are his pronunciations, what are his own confessions about this whole activity of rewriting this history textbook for the school? He presents a very diplomatic way and in their own diplomatic language, a kind of the philosophy which they had approached to rewrite these textbooks. And I quote from his paper, "Temporalization was not simply a question of periodization. It had deeper connotation. The question was, what did each of these periods signify?" Now here, temporalization in the Indian history has been always a controversial topic. And in this case, he's juxtaposing this temporalization issue vis-a-vis ideological issues, and he's pitting one against the other. For the Hindu right, the ancient period was the glorious time of Hindu civilization, and the Muslim period. And the Muslim period, that is 1200 to 1800 in the current era, was a time of decline. The Hindu period was a time when Hindu philosophy and religion flourished, science and mathematics developed, the sacred texts of the Hindus were written, and Hindu culture spread outwards from India. Mind you, this is not his pronouncement. He is paraphrasing what the Hindu right is claiming to be. All that is of value was to be discovered in the Hindu period. And all the traumas, conflicts and problems of the present could be traced back to the Muslim period. So it's a typical reductionist approach of one versus the other, binary approach, that he is trying to portray, and how the Hindu right, so-called Hindu right-wing historians, or in the yesterworld it was called as the nationalist historians, were looking at history. So Hindus were oppressed, the Hindu religion was under threat, so on and so forth, were the claims of the Hindu right. So what has been his approach or his committee's approach in this, given this background of this binary that had existed? If the Hindu right represented the Muslim rulers as intolerant, oppressive, bigoted and cruel, the secular textbooks showed that they were open-minded and tolerant, that they were patrons of Hindu shrines and arts, and they nurtured a syncretic culture. So this secular textbooks, what he is referring to, is again led by Professor Romila Thapar, and that activity starts all the way from the 60s onwards. So he is claiming that on the one side you have the right-wing historians claiming everything glorious about the India's past to the Hindu period and everything dark about the India's past to the Muslim invasion period. On the other hand, you had a group of secular, quote-unquote secular historians writing secular textbooks, which exactly proved the other way, which means he is himself claiming it, that the secular historians who wrote the secular textbook before him had left no stone unturned to show how the invaders were open-minded and they were tolerant, and they went to the extent of even nurturing a syncretic culture, patronizing Hindu arts and Hindu shrines as well. Now, with that background, I mean, his approach, he has written this entire history textbook by keeping these two views in mind, and he is trying to say that we need to evolve from these two binary dialogues altogether. That's his way of approaching to revive the history textbooks of this country, and which has been in vogue for the last 14 to 15 years. Now, in this talk, I have taken a case study of class 6 and 7 alone, and few of them I'll be showing the example. I have a write-up which has covered all the examples, but in the presentation, due to want of time, I am limiting to very few examples, where I am showing that although Niladri Bhattacharya, the chairman of the committee, claims to do a kind of balancing act between these two apparently polar groups of history writers, eventually he takes a particular stand, or his committee takes a particular stand. Taking a stand per se is not a problem when it comes to ideological discourses from a stage. But when it comes to writing a textbook about history, informing our impressionable minds about the country's past, whether taking such a stand is justifiable or not at the cost of taxpayers' money is a bigger question to be asked. And that's what I'm trying to ask through this small presentation. Starting from, say, this is the very first chapter. They name the chapters. Earlier it was history, okay? Now it is, they call it under social science. And if you look at the name of the book itself, it is Our Pasts. And the past is in plural, mind you. It's not a singular. And they justified, it is not just a kind of a superficial neglect by the writers that they have put a plural, an extra S in the title. No, it was very deliberate. It was very meditated upon by these groups, and they justified. I'll show that justification a little later. But what do they intend by putting it in a plural form? That they claim, no, you do not have a singular past. You have multiple pasts, and their very agenda is to confuse, to confound the impressionable minds and bring out from their closed approach, close-jacketed thinking of having a singular past. That's their clear agenda here. So this is Our Pasts, part 1, which is class 6, and in the very first chapter, in page 6, like they show this is a very famous Harappan statue, bust of a man. And what do they caption it? Important man. It was Marshall who had first excavated it, and Marshall who had excavated it himself names it as a priest king. Okay. Now why our textbook writers have a problem with this phrase priest king is something that is beyond my understanding, but they call it as an important man. Now if you see, some of our homegrown or homegrown historians and archaeologists, namely this Ramprasad Chanda, not well researched or not much popular in today's time compared to other historians of his period. If you look at the works, the way he had worked and he had combated the narrative during his time. If you remember, Risley, who had come out with an index of Indians measuring the facial dimensions, this was published, the survey, the census was conducted in 1901, and Risley published this in 1902. It was Ramprasad Chanda who had immediately got into work, and he had done a similar study, and he had come out with this work. It was also published in 1910, completely refuting Risley's stand and showing how the Risley's argument were completely filled with inconsistencies and errors. He had shown it with the data, but that even though it is published in 1910, in the public discourse it has not seen the light of the day as much as it had merited. So what are this historian Ramprasad Chanda has to say? And this is, I am taking this excerpt from an article that appeared in 1987 by an American scholar, Dhyansky. He paraphrases Chanda. He says, and I quote, "It is not possible to keep the eyes unmoved unless they are fixed on a certain point. The nearest point on which the eyes can be fixed with ease is the tip of the nose. Therefore, in the most of the texts indistinctly proved that the eyes of the yogi engaged in dhyana should be fixed at the tip of the nose." And this is squarely discussed in the context of this figure 20, which is what I put again the figure 20 from that article to reinforce this fact. And this is what the scholars have attributed the description of to this bust. Now, what problem do our textbook writers have to attribute this statue to a yogi? And but they have just called him as an important man. Now, this is also not underplaying the provenance of yoga back during that time, or ritualistic aspect back during that time. This is not just ending at that. It's a very clever play and a notorious play of introducing this particular man as an important man. Why? Because if you look at the early reports on the excavation when Mortimer Wheeler had announced it. Mortimer Wheeler, by the way, started this excavation from 1924, and it went on for 5 to 6 years, and I think it was in the early 30s or late 20s that the entire report had come out. They were baffled that they did not find any large palaces, palatial excavations, living places that they could lay their hands upon. This baffled the archaeologists because they had come with the baggage of archaeological knowledge that they had in their soil, where this, and again, Aravindanji keeps on alluding to it, that we have to come out of this whole shell of composing history from their perspective of history comprising of only monarchs and kings and rulers. History is not just about that. Because their land had that kind of a culture, their archaeology and history had that kind of a leaning, they came with that baggage of knowledge, and when they, in this soil, when they did not find it, it was really a baffling thing for them. And there was again a lot of scholarly debates about whether we were not successful in excavating such palatial remnants or they were really not there. But it is by and large well settled that there were no palatial remnants, or there were no palatial buildings built during that time. Now, to just buttress that point, this is one of the latest articles from last year that I have taken. This is Killing the Priest King, addressing the egalitarianism in Indus Valley civilization. So, I'll not get into the minor details, but the take-home message here is that the egalitarianism was prevalent in the society. That is, distribution of wealth was more or less even. So, in that context, are you not making a very distorted narration by calling one statue as an important man? In what way he becomes important? You have not explained that in the text, because that leaves a lot of scope of imagination, and it is left at the hands of the teachers to explain what that important could mean. And it all depends upon the preparedness of the teacher as well as the ideological leanings of that particular teacher and the way the impressionable minds take these words from the teachers as words of wisdom. Now, coming ahead, I'll be just throwing one examples after the other. In page 35, when they have to talk about the Soma, mind you, just in the talk before also, and several scholars have alluded to, the word Soma appears in multiple contexts, and there are various meanings attributed to Soma. One of the meaning, and today also it is very much in currency, is that meaning Soma attributed to the moon, coming from Manas. So, those etymology are also very much in currency even today. But what our textbook squarely writes it, Soma, a plant from which a special drink was prepared. Such kind of dumbing it down to this one such interpretation and not giving our students the multitudes of interpretations of this word Soma is again a very, very clever trick. It's not just a matter of naive negligence. The word Soma has got very much deeper meaning. It occurs so many times. As the writers of history, are they not supposed to lay down all these interpretations? Okay, even if there is a limitation that the textbook offers in terms of the space, in terms of number of pages, can't they include a line saying that there are various interpretations of Soma which have not been agreed upon till date? But no, they are categorically coming to this conclusion that Soma is indeed a plant's extract made for preparing a special drink. So this goes on to again to the preparedness and the presence of mind of the teacher who is going to interpret these lines for the impressionable minds. Again, in the same page, if you see the line that I have underlined, Rigveda is in old or Vedic Sanskrit, which is different from the Sanskrit you learn in school these days. Again, this is a very cleverly worded statement, and this indicates that whatever you had in the past, whether it is good or bad, it's a very alienated system because that language was completely different. You see, now you may use the word Sanskrit, but you see that Sanskrit is very, very different from the Sanskrit that your Rigveda, which you venerate so much, is written in. It is indeed true. By the time of Panini, again, one of the unfortunate aspects of our country is that we are not very accurate in terms of dating our own heroes, past heroes. Panini is one such very good example, whose date is still not completely agreed upon by all the scholars. But what we know is that Panini's time, there was a big schism, or there was a big leap of scholarship from what was known as Vedic Sanskrit and what was known as the Sanskrit that was used for communication, be it oral or written, during his time. But every language evolves. It doesn't mean that one has completely got rid of the older language and have starting it afresh. It's not like Windows, different versions of the Windows, where one is not compatible with the older version. That is very different. But if a student is getting that impression, it is very easy for these agenda peddlers to cut the roots of these students from their past to which we would like them to get associated. These very, very carefully chosen words and phrases are very subtle indications of their propaganda here. That is what I'm trying to highlight. Now, very interestingly, the very next page of that of the same chapter, they put a title of this paragraph saying how historians study the Rigveda. Now, these historians are again from this era, given back maybe before 30 years or before 40 years from when this book was published. Now, if the Sanskrit that we study in the school is very different, and the Rigvedic Sanskrit was very different, there arises the question, how did these historians access the Sanskrit of the Rigvedas? Are these historians making any effort to inform the impressionable minds of how the Rigvedic information have been inferred and passed on to the next generation? They do not do that attempt. But they boast about how they can have an upper hand over interpretations of the verses in the Rigveda, albeit telling you that the Rigvedic Sanskrit was very different. So this is, to me, speaking through both the sides. So that is not really something that I would call writing as a scientific way of writing it. Now, this is very notorious, again, subject of dividing language into different families. All said and done, today the mainstream linguistics internationally believes that we have Indo-European language of family to which all the northern Indian languages belong to, and we have a Dravidian language family to which all the languages spoken in southern part of India, namely Tamil, Telugu, Malayalam, Kannada, belongs to. It's very interesting to see who was the propounder of this kind of a language family. It was Bishop Caldwell, one of the missionaries, early missionaries who had come and started his evangelical practices in the southern part of India. He had come with this concept of Dravidian language family. But it is interesting to see later researchers who have drawn parallels between the Dravidian language family and some families spoken in the Scythian region, the Ural belt. When researchers can trace similarities between a Dravidian family which are separated in the geography so far apart, why is it that they cannot conceive upon a common shared root for the languages spoken in the entire country? And there are many such examples to prove that the words that are appearing in Tamil also appear in Sanskrit and vice versa. It is like asking if Sanskrit is old or Tamil is old. That is completely a moot question that one has to ask, because that can never be resolved either linguistically or archaeologically. But the shared root that these two languages have, that is something that we can clearly see verify it by ourselves. For instance, if you take the words for some of the technical terms that are used in even Tamil today, for instance, the Siddha medicine, they refer to their dictionary as Nighantu. And it is the same word Nighantu that we also come across in Sanskrit for the same concept. And in that Siddha Nighantu, or the glossary of different technical terms, if we see, there are lots of terms which we find them in currency both in Sanskrit as well as in Prakrit, which may not be in current currency in Tamil language. For instance, I'll just give you two examples. Tunda, Vakra Tunda, we know from the Sanskrit verse that it means nose or an appendage in the face. It is with the same connotation, Tunda is used for nose in the Siddha Nighantus. Similarly, Uru. Uru today in Sanskrit or in some languages of Prakrit derived North Indian language, we understand it as the word connoting thigh. It is with the same meaning that the Uru word is used in Tamil also for referring to thigh. Today, in the current parlance, Tamil may not use these words. So this shared root between proximal geography is not looked upon, and distant geographies sharing culture has been looked upon, and we still buy this divide of language family as Indo-European and Dravidian, and this being separate is something that we need to really, the linguists have to really think about and revive and think about a different kind of dividing the language families. So, but informing the impressionable mind about this right from their class 6 is indeed something very sinister. It will have sinister consequences. Now again, if you see in the same chapter, in the same class, in the next chapter, they have a section, cattle, horses and chariots. There are many prayers in Rigveda for cattle, children, and parenthesis you see what they have write, especially sons and horses. Now it is true that you have verses in Rigveda where the mantras are propitiated to beget a healthy son. Now, what was the context under which they wanted healthy son? Those are not being discussed about. The nuances are not being talked about. Now my question is, did they come across any Rigvedic verse where the birth of a girl child was decried upon? Where they said that the birth of a girl child is something of a bad omen? Or was it not something that is that the society wanted? Or were girls really unpopular during the Rigvedic times? Did they come across with such evidences? There are in fact evidences which are contrary to it. And one such I am quoting again from a Western scholar here, Kerry Brown. I mean, this is clearly a translation of this very oft-quoted Manusmriti verse, which is kind of cherry-picked and interpreted completely out of context. So that it is the English translation of that very Manusmriti text that Kerry Brown writes it in her book, Essential Teachings of Hinduism, where I quote, in ancient India, a woman was looked after not because she is inferior or incapable, but on the contrary, because she is treasured. She is the pride and power of the society. Just as the crown jewels should not be left unguarded, neither should a woman be left unprotected. If there are costly jewels, we do not throw them here and there like brass vessels. Costly material is protected. Now, this is a nuanced version. Now, one may have a debate saying why should she be considered as the crowned jewel. That's a feminist argument which may come about, but that's a different matter of debate altogether. But what I'm saying is this textbook writers have not paid attention to these kind of nuances. Rather, they cherry pick and they want to propagate a particular kind of a line of thought. Again, in chapter 4, finding about social difference. This is about burials. And if you carefully look at it, the way they have worded it, archaeologists think that objects found with a skeleton probably belong to the dead person. I mean, what else will the skeleton belong to other than a dead person? Okay, so probably belong to a dead person. Sometimes more objects are found in one grave than in the other. Blah, blah. These finds suggests that there was some difference in status amongst the people who were buried. This is completely going out of contrary to the fact that other archaeologists have established about the egalitarianism. It is in the same era that I am talking about. Okay, so this is, they are in the name of writing textbook, they are kind of, it is of course fiction of imagination, and that too having a sinister consequence. That you are trying to propagate something that has not existed about this class differences, which is today a Marxist way of looking at any society and how to pit one against the other. Now, sometimes the burial spots means for certain families. They give just clues, and there are no evidences to say what do they mean or what do they qualify as well as quantify by this term certain families. So these are all completely a fiction of imagination and contrarian to the even established archaeological historical facts, not even scientific facts, archaeological and historical facts. Now coming to, in the same context, chapter 5, just concentrate on the line which I am reading. This is about yaga, about different type of sacrifices that, again, yajna or yaga cannot be translated as sacrifice, but for the want of better word, I am just using it as sacrifice. This is that portion describing that. Now you see what the writers say. However, some people, such as those who were regarded as Shudras by the priests, were excluded from many rituals. This is in class 6. And they build upon this concept of this Chaturvarna and how the Shudras were kind of always oppressed and how that oppression continues, and they build upon this story even in class 7. So when I come to this class 7, I'll dwell more upon this. But is this not sowing seeds of class hatred in young impressionable minds? Imagine in the class which is now having multiple people belonging to, I mean today they recognize them by their birth, but this class is a heterogeneous mixture. But is it not sowing seeds of class hatred right from that very age? And is it and moreover, factually, Smriti literature does not categorically give a list of all those people should be excluded. I take a simple example. Suppose a board of director meeting is conducted. The janitors of that building, will they be part of that meeting? Does that mean that that organization for which this board of directors is meeting, do they anyway disrespect the janitors in that building? Or will the minutes of this board of directors meeting include, say, the janitors were not included, the other workers of this building were not included, they were not included, these were not included. Will they come up with such kind of a list, an infinite list of who all were not included? So this, again, a very clever way to propagate their ideology in our impressionable minds. And look at the one that the textbook asks the student as a homework to be done. Make a list of all those who would be present at the sacrifice. Which are the categories that are described in terms of their occupation? I mean, today, in the gender argument, we say we should not kind of bring about this gender identity right in the younger age. I mean, which is something very obvious. I belong to the old school, so I do not subscribe to this idea. But something that is very obvious from both the phenotype and the genotype, you want people not to have this recognition. But subtle things where the differences are completely obsolete, you want student to take cognition of it, and not just take cognition of it, translate that into practical action through these exercises. Remember what kind of havoc this would create in a mind and in a family when this goes, when the child goes and takes this homework very seriously. Ashwamedha Yaga, among all the different yagas, they picked up Ashwamedha because perhaps today also some places have this name associated still with it. And through the Ramayana serial, Rama is known to have performed Ashwamedha. Somehow in our society, the Ashwamedha Yaga is still in popular currency. And needless to say, they pick up this one such Ashwamedha Yaga and they very, very carefully describe whatever they want and whatever they have understood about it to propagate their idea. Now what particularly the light that comes into problematic issue here. They describe this yaga about leaving a horse loose, so on and so forth. The Raja who organized the sacrifice was recognized as being the very powerful, and all those who came brought gifts for him. The Raja was a central figure in this ritual. He often had a special seat of throne, blah, blah, blah. Having described everything about this Ashwamedha Yaga, see, we are writing history and informing the impressionable minds, whether you are going to create a patriotic sense in them or not is a different question. But are you not supposed to bring some kind of a harmony, thought of harmony in them? Now, why can't the same Ashwamedha Yaga can be looked upon as, portraying this as the most peaceful way of winning over the opponent without having any bloodshed? Has this ever been tried in any other civilization in the world? That you do not have a bloodshed, a war and win over the opponent's territory? Can't the historians highlight this aspect as a special aspect of Ashwamedha Yaga? And that's how the reality it happened. They did not shed the blood and the opponent was won over. Now, this is squarely from a political science point of view. Can't our impressionable minds be informed the positive aspect about it? I leave it to you at that. I mean, history is replete with examples of people who performed this yaga, which goes on to show the practicality of this strategy. It is not just that one person, one king did it and it was again venerated throughout the history of time. Almost all the kings, even King Ashoka, is supposed to have done Ashwamedha Yaga. So how it has stood the test of time, how it was really the optimal way to win over the enemy, that aspect is completely not thought about. Again, Chaturvarna, for which they have given very fact, on grounds of fact, they can be completely wrong, but more of it I'll come when I come to the class 7. These are still in class 6 that some of the examples that I've given. I would like to take you into, I'd like you to remember this description about the Shudras. Last were the Shudras who had to serve the other three groups and could not perform any ritual. Often women were so grouped with this Shudras. Now, this is the straight-jacketed reductionist view about this Chaturvarna is completely wrong. And you have n number of scholarship, at least today, and in the age of information, that contrarian viewpoints have been raised and have been established. which are textbook, this is not written in some distant past. It is as back as just 15 years back, which was still, it's not that 15 years back there was dearth of any information. Now coming to class 7, you have a number of problems with this building up of class 6. I'll mind you, the examples that I've shown from class 6 are not exhaustive. In the write-up that I have some more examples, but I'm just gleaning through some prominent myths that the textbook has. The very first chapter in class 7 begins with the term Hindustan. Okay. Now, they do not have, being the textbook of history and being historians and being Indians who are writing for Indian students, they do not make a mention of the Janapadas mentioned in the Mahabharata in this very paragraph. Rather, what do they rely upon? They rely upon the Muslim court chroniclers, namely Minhaj-i-Siraj, who wrote in Persian, and all the data that they write are based on this particular chronicles. And this entire textbook, they seem to have a favor for the Muslim chroniclers of the medieval era. Now look at this, again, coming back to the language. This is exactly taken from the textbook itself, okay? In 1318, the poet Amir Khusru noted that there was, and they paraphrase what Khusru would have told, a different language in every region of this land. Sindhi, Lohri, Kashmiri, so on and so forth, in the area around Delhi. This is what they are quoting as what Khusru had looked at. Now they write in their language. Amir Khusru went on to explain that in contrast to these languages, there was Sanskrit, which did not belong to any region. Now look at the just play of language here. Just rewrite the sentence by saying Sanskrit did not belong to any particular religion, any particular region. Just by inclusion of the word particular, the entire sense and your leanings of the ideologies are made clear. And that is in fact was true, that Sanskrit did not belong to any particular religion. It was kind of a pan-Indic intellectual means of communication. Now, where do I have evidence about it? This is told by King Simbhupala. King Simbhupala is one of the Kakatiya dynasty Racharla kings. Kakatiya dynasty is, again, it is one of the most flourishing dynasties of 14th century. They had their own shares of victories and defeats, but somehow they have not been sung, they have not got their due merit in this current discourses. And one particular reason for which the Racharla clan in the Kakatiya dynasty must be celebrated is that during that time, the female rulers had taken very high prominence. During that part throughout the world, you did not have that kind of a female dominance. I'll come to that point in a few minutes, in a few slides. This is King Simbhupala, who writes, Tasya padam buja jato varno vigata kalmashaha yasya sodaratam praptam bhagiratha phalam, bhagiratha tapap phalam. Tatra recharla vamshabdhi sharadraka sudhakaraha kalanidhi rudarashri rasid dachanayakaha. He wrote two important works in Sanskrit. One is called Rasarnava Sudhakara, and the other one is studied in the music college even now, because that is the only existing commentary on Rasaratnakara. Rasaratnakara has got it's a musical text, and it has got two commentaries, and one of the commentaries was written by King Simbhupala, who declares that I am a Shudra. Tasya padambuja jato. Padambuja jato is a paryaya for telling that I am a Shudra, because this has got connotation to that Purusha Sukta verse, which says, which attributes head to the Brahmana, hands to the Kshatriya, thighs to the Vaishya, and legs to the Shudra. So this has got exactly connotation to that. Look at one more example. Bruma sarasvatang kulabhuva kimnidhe kautukanam tasya neka bhuta guna katha kirna karnamritasya yatra strinam api kimaparam janma bhasha vadeva. Yatra strinam api janma bhasha vadeva. Where this is taken from Bhojaraja's work, during Bhojaraja's time, which was not very past from Amir Khusro's time, where it says, Yatra strinam api kimaparam janma bhasha vadeva, where even the ladies across the entire country takes pride in calling Sanskrit as their mother tongue. Now, even if you say that this is a poetic imagination and there was hyperbole or exaggeration, it goes on to say the wide prevalence of this language, Sanskrit. And mind you, if Sanskrit was really relegated to a particular caste or a particular varna or a particular jati that these Marxist historians would like us to believe, that particular group did not exceed 5% in their population. But in the last 500 years also, if you see, more than 5,000 works, original works have been created in this particular language, Sanskrit. So if that is the case, then what they write in the, what Amir Khusro had observed and what these historians are reiterating the words of Amir Khusro should be completely thrown out of the window. Now this is something as an outsider I can verify it and tell it before you, but why this committee of eminent historians are not able to put out these facts in front of our kids? One more from again Bhoja's time. Ke bhuvan natya rajasya rajye prakrita bhasha. It was a natural language of the people of this whole region. Kale Sri Sahasankasya kena samskrita vadinaha. Ke na samskrita vadinaha. Who is selling himself as not a speaker of Sanskrit? Had it been not this popular, then why should the works in Sanskrit have been created? Anyway, now coming to Dharampal's work, which also goes against the fact that presents about Sanskrit in the NCERT textbooks. Dharampal, as you all may be already aware, and some of the talks that was covered in this very platform, he had chronicled, assembled the exchanges that had happened between British officers during their time in 18th century of different social systems prevalent in our country. There it gives what are the subjects that the students studied, what were the caste of these students who were in these schools. So that data is also very helpful, but our historians or our textbook writers are completely oblivious to these historical facts. Now in chapter 12, in page 12, chapter 1, this was also the period when new religions appeared in the subcontinent. Merchants and migrants first brought the teachings of the Holy Quran to India in the 7th century. Muslims regard Quran as their holy book and accept the sovereignty of one God, Allah, whose love, mercy and bounty embrace all those who believe in Him without regard to social background. Now in the same page 12, while describing Islam, it is written that, and like Hinduism, Islam was interpreted in a way in a variety of ways by its followers. Now this is a very clever way of introducing Islam as well as creating a false equivalence. When they want to introduce Hinduism, they have all negative things to be talked about right from class 6. But when they want to introduce Islam, see, look at the choice of words and choice of the phrasing and the kind of emotion that it conveys. And you see the other disclaimer that they give, varieties of ways of interpreting it. But mind you, they do not inform us that yes, Islam also had varieties of interpretation, but each interpreter fought against each other and there was bloodshed. But in the Hindu Sampradaya, yes, there was disbelief, there were disagreements with respect to interpretations of the Vedas itself. That's why you had Advaita, Advaita and Vishishta Advaita as well. But none of these Mathacharya went behind the blood of the other. That part is not being talked about because this is very important. Otherwise, this gives a very false equivalence to our impressionable mind saying, okay, Islam is having multiple interpretations, so was your Hindus also who had multiple interpretation. What's the big deal? What's the big difference? Now coming to a very important aspect which concerns this geography also, right where we are recording this. The best known Chauhan, this is the textbook, the language used in the textbook, I quote, the best known Chahamana or Chauhan as we know today, ruler was Prithviraj III, who defeated an Afghan ruler named Sultan Muhammad Ghori, but lost to him in the very next year, 1191, who defeated Ghori in 1191 and who got defeated in 1192. Now what does this implicate? that there were two wars fought, one in 1191 and the other one was in 1192. 1191 war, Chahmana won, and 1192 he got defeated. That's what we infer from this textbook. But what does the history on this actually talk about? There are various accounts of this fight between Sultan Muhammad Ghori and Prithviraj III. Now, if you look at, this is a compilation that you see here. If you look at Prithviraj Raso, which talks about as many as 21 battles. Okay. Now, there's a fourth column which I have collated. What are the current historians' critique of all these accounts? So, current historians also believe there are several inconsistencies in this. So, we can leave aside that Prithviraj Raso is not a true historical account, but more of a narration building to create a narrative for that particular community. Look at Hammira Mahakavya. It's a Jain work. It talks about 9 wars. And current historians believe that's a very reliable source. Prithviraja Prabandha, it is a Hindu, the author of it is a Hindu, has Hindu affiliation. It also talks about 9 wars. And there are no negative comments by the current historians, scholars about this work. Prithviraja Kosha, again a Hindu work talking about 21 battles. Surjana Charita, 21 battles, and 21 is considered by now as a traditional number. Prabandha Chintamani, 23 by a Hindu. But now come to the court chroniclers of be it Jamiul Hikayat or Tajul Ma Asir, Tabakat-e Nasiri, and one more which I am not able to see in the display here. All of them talk about either 1 or 2 battles. They had kind of a limitation because they were writing it for their Muslim kings. If they show their Muslim king in a very, very poor state, they will not be alive for writing the next chronicle. So they had a compulsion and a limitation. So where they showed that their king got defeated once, but then their king won the very next battle. That was their compulsion. What compulsion do our textbook writers have in the 21st century? I am not saying you write that there were 21 wars or 23 wars. That is not my claim or submission here that I am trying to make. At least inform the students about the existing number of data about this war, which is a very crucial war in the history of our country. And let the students know, okay, fine, there is a divided opinion among different scholars. Having not done that, having relied upon just one source of historical information, that too with a vested interest, if it is not a propaganda, then I do not know what propaganda is. Now, this historian from whose work I have taken, Prithviraj, R.B. Singh, what he writes, one may however trace among the early Muslim writers a deep-rooted hatred for Hindus, which is very obvious, for whom they always had used a contemptuous language. Again, I ask a question. These Muslim historians may have had an agenda in the past, that's fine. But today, when a committee sits at the cost of a taxpayer's money in so-called democratic secular India, why are they taking stands? This is clearly a stand that I'm trying to show that they have reported 2 wars and that 2 wars is only coming from the Muslim chronicles. Why? That's a question that we need to ask and perhaps answer will be given. Another very crucial subject from the history of our country. Going back to Kakatiya dynasty, but this time a queen, very, very dominant queen. But look at the way she is portrayed in our textbook, class 7, page 33. Minhaj-e Siraj thought that the queen's rule, this is about Razia Sultan, okay? It's about Razia Sultan, rule went against the ideal social order created by God. God with a G capital. Which God? We do not know. Textbook is silent about that, okay? In which women were supposed to be subordinate to men. He therefore asked, in the double quotes, in the register of God's creation, since her account did not fall under the column of men, how did she gain from all her excellent qualities? This is a particular problem of a particular religion and this is decreed by a particular God. Why is the textbook camouflaging it by using generic terms? Now see, on her inscription and coins, Razia mentioned that she was a daughter of Sultan Iltutmish. Now see the climax that comes. This was in contrast to the Queen Rudramadevi of the Kakatiya dynasty of Varangal, part of modern Andhra Pradesh in Telangana, Rudramadevi changed her name on her inscription, pretended she was a man. Another queen, Didda, we'll come to her later, but Rudramadevi. In fact, it is an unfortunate thing that even in 21st century, you have a movie, Tollywood makes a movie peddling the same point. I do not know the director and the producer of that movie got inspired by the book or not, or whether the book was inspired by that movie, it's a different issue. But the media also depicts it. But what do the inscriptions reveal us? These are not historical opinions, okay, they are inscriptions. What I'm showing are inscriptions here. South Indian inscription, volume 10. Telugu inscription from the Madras Presidency by Ramaya Pantulu mentions that Rudrama Mahadevi at Patodbhati. There's another inscription where she is mentioned as Rudramamba. Again, one more inscription, Rudrama Mahadevi. Whether it is Rudrama Mahadevi or Rudramamba or Rudrama Mahadevi, all these things are, we know, we understand, it's all striling, all feminine words. So nowhere she had pretended. Yes, her father brought her up as a man, with all imparting all the valor and attributes that a father would like to see in a very courageous and a powerful child. That is true. But she did not pretend as a man. She was not an imposter, which our historians would like to believe. And she, you see, she is contrasted against whom? Razia Sultan. Other historians who have done similar study, they have hailed Rudramadevi as the only queen during her time in the entire world where she had large command over the geography as well as very powerful command, unparalleled in the entire world. Our textbook does not talk about that. Veera Rudramadevi iti. So, anyway, so this is again coming back to the point that I started with. What was the agenda and the whole sankalpa of these textbook writers? I am quoting from Neeladri Bhattacharya again. The earlier textbooks were narratives of the nation. Now, which kind of narrative he had already described about Hindu narrative, a right-wing narrative and a secular narrative. He has talked about that. The idea of the unity of India was projected back into the past, and history was read as a gradual unfolding of a nation. Could we get away from this narrative? That is what is their complete agenda in the textbook, and that's how all these examples that I quote about are not only just they're going away from the narrative. What could the strategies be possibly deployed? In the textbooks we offer no radical critique of the nation, but we problematize the idea of the nation in a variety of ways. We're claiming it. It is not my interpretation or my psychoanalysis of this committee. It's confessed by them. They want to problematize the idea of the nation in a variety of ways. And in doing that, they have some other ulterior agendas also. Okay? So in the lower secondary class, we reframed the history content and calling it as our pasts. And hence they say, this was to underline the multiplicity of histories and narratives that constitute the past, and to emphasize that there is no single linear narrative. There is no one national past that we can comfortably return to. You see in which kind of discomfort that our textbook writers want a very young, impressionable mind to have. And when the child grows with this kind of an impression from class 6 and 7, think of what kind of attachment with his or her own past that child will be able to have. So with that, I come to close of my talk here, and I would like to quote what Radhakrishnan had to say. And this was perhaps the first committee formed for education in the independent India. We had Wood's Dispatch, all those things before in the colonial period, but when 47 we got our independence, right in immediately after independence there was a commission formed called University Education Commission, and Dr. Radhakrishnan was the chairman of that. No nation is healthy that parts company with its traditions. Social development is an organic process. The continuing influence of the past on the present cannot be ignored. Our art and literature, our law and history belong to the mainstream of our culture. Every Indian student should get to know the main outlines of history of India which is not a mere chronicle of dates and defeats, of follies and failures. He should know the lives of the heroes who express the spirit of our civilization, the seers of the Vedas, the Buddha, the Shankara, Ashoka, and the Akbar. So these are, according to Radhakrishnan, the heroes of our civilization, who represent the spirit of our civilization. And there are many examples in this textbook. Due to want of time, I have not gone into all those examples. How, by just a stroke of pen, through one or two sentences in a half-hearted way, Adi Shankara has dealt with, Ramanujacharya has dealt with, and how you dedicate a whole section or a whole page or a whole chapter for Sufis. So I bring my presentation to a close here and urge you to look into these aspects even more and find for yourself some of the follies that you may discover in these textbooks. With that, I once again thank the organizers for the opportunity. Namaste.
Thank you so much, Ramanathan ji, for sharing your insights into how history textbooks are used to brainwash the young Indian minds. I have one question, if I can put across. What will happen if we keep on consuming poison chronically, gradually, every day little bit? What will happen? We'll die for sure, right? But it will take time. In the same manner, what Sir has said, we can conclude that the historians are doing the same thing with us, right? By giving us the wrong or inaccurate information through history textbooks, they are trying to kill the Indian minds, right? So, can we all pledge to question the information that is brought to us, be it newspaper, be it history textbooks, anything? We need to question it in order to get to the right answer. So, sir, thank you so much. It was amazing to have you over here, because I feel it was really important for our students to understand how the theories that are presented to us, they could be wrong. Not everything that is printed is correct. So, thank you so much.